Hey all, Webcamparrot here, with a video on my top 11 DC comics. Comics that I think should be on everyone's must-read list. For this list, I tried to not only include comics that I thought were incredibly well written, but also comics that most people have never even heard of. Everyone has heard of Watchmen, everyone has been recommended Final Crisis. It would be pointless for me to list them here, and to be honest, neither of them would make it on this list for me anyway. I've read an enormous number of comics, as anyone familiar with this channel knows, and it was very difficult for me to narrow it down to just 11. I'm sure there are some I missed, and I'm sure there are comics I have yet to read that would otherwise make it on here. Some of these comics are great reads for those of you new to DC Comics, and others might be something for readers that don't mind something a little heavier. Apologies for any name mispronunciations ahead of time. First, I have a couple of honourable mentions. Swamp Thing Volume 2 is a comic that many DC fans have heard of, and is perhaps the breakaway of Alan Moore's career in the comic book industry, when he took over the run early on. However, in my somewhat controversial opinion, I think the comic only got better after Alan Moore left it. The comic features the titular Swamp Thing dealing with new, horrific, cosmic and mystic elements in every issue. It's a deep and philosophical exploration into things like the conflicts of good and evil, identity and psychoanalysis. Not for the faint of heart, Swamp Thing Volume 2 is absolutely an adult comic, and maybe isn't the best for newer readers. If you really want an in-depth psychoanalytic philosophical look into this comic, I have to recommend the segment on Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Cooper Cherry and Taylor Atkins on the Alan Moore Swamp Thing arc. They take a pretty interesting and close look at this arc through the lens of thinkers like Freud, Lacan and Guattari, and it's a type of analysis that I haven't really seen before on a comic book. In contrast to Swamp Thing Volume 2 is the legendary Justice League International by J.M. DeMatteis, Keith Giffen and Kevin Maguire, and it presents us with a far more comical look at some of our more traditional heroes. The facial and expressive detail for almost every single panel is incredible, with many characters such as Booster Gold and Guy Gardner getting their most character-defining traits here. Justice League International proved that the almost sitcom comedy style it incorporates could work in the comic book medium, and continues to inspire today. Martian Manhunter's addiction to Oreos after being introduced to them by Captain Marvel being one of my favourite additions to DC Comics by this particular series. A comic from much more recently that even I am surprised to include here is Death of Hawkman, originally solicited as Hawkman Adam Strange Out of Time by Mark Andreyko and Aaron Lopresti. The comic brings together the two somewhat unlikely allies of Hawkman and Adam Strange to face off against one of the Justice League's most fearsome villains, Despero. Not only is this probably Despero's best appearance to date, but it's also one of my favourite Hawkman comics across all of DC, which alone speaks volumes about the quality of this comic. The art is truly up to the quality of the time that it came out, with colourful action-packed scenes spread across the alien world of places like Rann. Now, onto the actual list, I have another unusual entry at number 11. That being Rebels Volume 2 by Tony Bedard and Andy Clark. This comic really scratches one of my gripes with modern comics, that being a lack of world building. Have you ever noticed how it's strange that so many of these comics take place exclusively on Earth? Well, you won't find that here. Rebels is an unabashed exploration of a great many alien worlds and perspectives that we just never get to see in your standard hero fare. It features the ever-interesting anti-hero Vril Dox, perhaps better known as Brainiac 2. As brilliant as he is heartless and cold, Vril deals with many problems across the universe with a genuine intelligence that is hard to find in comics. He is not simply a character that professes to be intelligent. He shows us his brilliance over and over again throughout the comic. Featuring a number of thrilling arcs, it's brought to its peak by what is probably Starro's most iconic storyline as the Conqueror Kobe, a foe that even Vril's brilliance struggles to compare to. Great for new readers, and for power scaling too, for those of you interested in that sort of thing. And also a great read for people that are looking for a few more sci-fi elements in their comic books. At number 10, we have Our Man Volume 1 by Tom Peyer and Rags Morales, another surprisingly good title. You'll struggle to find another comic as willing as this one to have a straight-up overpowered protagonist whilst managing to keep its tone. Our Man can almost always deal with any of his problems immediately because of his immense control over time, but it's his choices not to simply hand-wave away all his problems that makes the comic work. We find Our Man not only dealing with difficult problems like what it means to be human, but also terrifying threats like the powerful android Amazo, in what is probably his best appearance. Our Man Volume 1's experimental style and storytelling never fails to keep me interested, but despite this, it never loses its down-to-earth appeal and reverence for the history of DC Comics. Its experimental style, however, might mean it's not too suitable for new readers. At number 9 is the limited series Midnighter and Apollo by Steve Orlando and Fernando Blanco. Equal parts touching and brutal, this comic has Apollo whisked away to hell by the ever-manipulative Neuron, and it's up to his lover, Midnighter, to save him. This comic has everything you'd expect from a good romp through hell, including plenty of grisly artistic spectacle, intrigue, and deception. This comic has so many twists and turns, with everyone looking to outsmart each other, really living up to Neuron's title as the Prince of Lies, and putting Midnighter and Apollo literally through hell to prove it. I've rarely seen back and forth cat and mouse trickery and deception executed as well as this comic does it, and with some tasteful gay romance to boot. For what it's worth, I also think this comic has the best chemistry between Midnighter and Apollo of any comic, and probably the best gay representation across all of comic book history in general, which puts it in a special place for me. Very easy to pick up for newer readers as well. At number 8, I have Justice League Dark, both volumes. Created by a large number of authors, these comics take some of the best elements of the old Vertigo storytelling style from things like Hellblazer and Lucifer without sacrificing pacing or an adventurous feel to do it. Just like the title implies, Justice League Dark really does feel like a grittier, more magical, mystical Justice League comic, and is probably one of my favourite comics featuring Constantine. I never feel good recommending titles like Hellblazer or Lucifer because they are so inconsistent, slow-paced, and don't really represent the wider comic book storytelling format, where Justice League Dark has none of those problems. It's also a great set of comics for scaling and cosmology, featuring some of DC's most powerful villains that I have mentioned on this channel before, like Pralaya, The Other Kind, and Blight. Definitely a suitable comic for new readers. In 7th is Animal Man, first written by Grant Morrison and then picked up later by Peter Milligan, Tom Veitch, Jamie Delano, and Jerry Prosser. This is one of the original Vertigo titles, and really represents the incredibly strange, more adult-themed comics that would be produced from that label. Animal Man could largely be seen to be an exploration into esoterica, limit experiences, and the metafictional relationship between an author and their creation. The art and storytelling is very experimental throughout this comic, to the point where it's hard for me to even know how to describe it, other than it's consistently well done. The everydayness of protagonist Buddy Baker, combined with the absolutely insane situations he finds himself, blend together into a great subversion of that standard hero fare at the time. This comic is quite similar to Swamp Thing Volume 2, but has the advantage of much better pacing. Maybe not the best for new readers, however. At number 6 is the Gerard Way Doom Patrol run, including the Milk Wars event, written by, of course, Gerard Way, Steve Orlando, and Magdalene Visaggio. First featuring many wacky characters such as Milkman Man, The Disappointment, and Retcon Corporation, these comics are without a doubt some of the most insane pieces of fiction I've ever read. Taking the already bizarre Doom Patrol, Gerard Way was able to add a light-hearted and fresh tone to the antics of an already strange team. This run represents as deep a look into the realms of metafiction as any comic out there, without being bogged down by slower pacing or mountains of exposition. Gerard Way's plotlines move at lightning speeds, and in some of the most unique directions in any comic. I never know what to expect from his Doom Patrol run, except that it will be something brilliant, witty, and entirely new. Despite the overall madness of these issues, an emotional beat is still consistently hit, with many characters having to come to terms with real existential or tragic concerns. Tied all up together with excellent artistic talent and direction, the psychedelic colorscapes of this comic really blend together into a read that is great, even for newer readers. In number 5 is Booster Gold Volumes 1 and 2 by Booster Gold creator Dan Jurgens and artist Norm Rapmund, with some issues being taken over by Jeff Johns, Jeff Katz, Keith Giffen, DeMatteis, and Chris Batista. Already you can tell here that both of these comics are going to be great because of the legendary authors and artists who many of you probably just recognize me naming. The first volume represents Booster Gold's primary character vision, and takes a closer look at what life is like for one of the smaller, less well-known DC heroes, as well as for a time traveler from hundreds of years in the future. Booster Gold represents a brand and a business as well as a hero, which gives us stories quite unlike the other superhero comics of the time. Volume 2, on the other hand, takes quite a different turn, building itself off the back of the Justice League International series I mentioned in my honourable mentions. It incorporates a ton of the best humour that JLI had to offer, and might even be seen as a strict improvement over it. Volume 2 pays a great deal of homage to comic history, thanks to Booster Gold's role as a secret time traveller and the greatest hero you have never heard of. Not only is the repeated use of time travel in a comic like this relatively strange, but I think Booster Gold Volume 2 nails it in a way that other comics, or even other media in general, have always failed to. I would struggle to find plot holes or inconsistencies that so often come with stories utilising time travel at all in these issues. These are both a great set of comics for new readers, and I would gladly recommend them to anyone. Fourth is the comic 52 by Mark Waid, Jeff Johns, Greg Rucka, and Grant Morrison. 52 was written under the premise of not including the big three of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and despite this, still manages to deliver one of the most authentically DC comics out there. Everything about this comic is exactly the type of storytelling you'd expect from a superhero comic, but taken to the level of a master. At 52 issues, this comic spans a huge number of different storylines and characters, and isn't afraid of the permanent consequences that these storylines might have to DC as a whole, with two major characters being permanently removed from the post-crisis continuity due to their deaths in this comic. Less touched on characters like Booster Gold, Elongated Man, Adam Strange, and The Question were given chances to shine here in what is perhaps the quintessential DC comic. For someone interested in superhero storytelling in DC, this is often my first recommendation, and is in my opinion a great read for newer comic fans as well. In this spot, I also considered including Grant Morrison's or Dwayne McDuffie's Justice League runs for similar reasons. For those of you interested in a comic like 52, I think those two runs also represent a kind of feel and type of storytelling that is quintessential to DC too, although, of course, they do feature Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. At number 3 is Superman Up in the Sky, a 6-part miniseries reprinting original stories by Tom King and Andy Kubert. These 6 issues really do represent everything that the light-hearted, hopeful storyman Supermans are all about. The comic starts with a young girl mysteriously kidnapped and taken somewhere up in the sky. Clark, knowing that if he doesn't go, no one will find this girl, risks the safety of the Earth to venture through space to find her. Along the way, Superman is forced to deal with a number of extreme trials that will test his resolve, moral code, and wit. With one of my favourite conclusions to a comic ever, this short series really has it all, from good pacing to unexpected twists and turns, with a few sweet and light-hearted moments as well. I cannot recommend this comic enough to people wondering why Superman ever got so popular. Comics like this one are exactly why. A somewhat similar comic I nearly included here goes by Superman Smashes the Klan. Definitely a comic I can also recommend for newer readers. However, neither of these are my favourite Superman comic. That would have to go to my second place, that being Superman Where Is Thy Sting by DeMatteis. When it comes to not only Superman comics, but also epic, hard-hitting, intense one-shots, no other comic does it like this one. As a one-shot comic, it's easy enough for anyone to get through, but there's enough densely packed storytelling here that I want to reread it several times every time I pick it up. I often see people complaining or accusing Superman of being a bad character, because it only takes a bad enough day, for instance in something like Injustice, for him to betray his morals and give up or turn evil. Well, let me tell you right now, this comic should put all of those ideas to rest. Superman is given the mother of all bad days. You'll see Superman face down his own death and the end of everything he loves, and he'll still keep looking for his happy end. Where Is Thy Sting, in my opinion, represents the epitome of what Superman's character is. If Up in the Sky shows you the quintessential everyday Superman, then it's this comic that shows us Superman pushed to the edge and tested on every level. Its esoteric language and insane otherworldly premise, combined with its unique trippy art style, really makes me feel like the world of the comic itself is being pushed right to the edge, just alongside Superman. Lastly, and certainly not least, is my all-time favourite comic book run, Doom Patrol Volume 2. From a wide variety of authors, it is mostly known for Grant Morrison's run of the comic that started in issue 19. And whilst I must admit he shook things up in a brilliant and new direction, many of the story arcs that follow on by other authors are just as good, if not better, than the Grant Morrison stuff. Doom Patrol Volume 2 takes the typical superhero story and completely turns it on its head in such an extreme manner that it vitally affects even the medium of the story itself. Where most comics will take from pop culture media, things like contemporary movies and TV, Doom Patrol Volume 2 has absolutely no qualms about its consistent influence from things like literature and philosophy. From the perhaps less than subtle Wizard of Oz allegory, with Robot Man being the Tin Man, Crazy Jane the Scarecrow, Niles Caulder the Wizard himself, and Dorothy being, well, Dorothy, to more obscure references like to Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. This comic would even feature an issue that might be my favourite issue ever, both satirising and being inspired by the Jack Kirby Stanley era of writing, featuring hilarious characters like John Constantine, better known as his superhero persona, the Hellblazer, or the villain Celestius the Man-God and his herald, the living guru hip-hop bishop of the beat, Cool Daddy-O of the Deva Dimensions. Another great story told in a double issue tells the tale of a bizarre entity known as Red Jack, claiming to be God, but also historical and mythological figures like Spring-Heeled Jack or Jack the Ripper. And given his strength and madness, for all we know, he very well could be. Red Jack on his own is one of the most unique and strangely thrilling characters that I find myself immediately curious about, despite him only appearing across 2 issues ever. It's hard not to see how Red Jack might be inspired by the real-life case of Judge Schreiber, one of the most famous cases of a paranoid schizophrenic ever, and in fact something that Freud and many other thinkers have researched at length. From his propensity to believe himself to be historical figures, to his ideations of godhood and many other things, it's almost impossible to not see the parallels there for me. Even small scenes across these 2 issues, like this one, hide details you would never expect, with this scene referencing What the Butler Saw, one of the first ever erotic films produced in the early 1900s. Which itself inspired a turn of phrase generally referring to any media like this that would be seen as pushing the boundaries of what was proper at time in England. Seeing this here tells us that Crazy Jane is seeing something forbidden, something she's not supposed to see, something that's considered pushing the boundaries or taboo. Doom Patrol Volume 2 is closer to high literature in its storytelling than a comic book, and even small, seemingly insignificant details can represent something far more. To be honest, I could endlessly talk about storylines and issues just from this one comic, but perhaps that can be for another video in the future. In any case, that's this video. I hope you all enjoyed it, as it is unlike any of my other videos. Mostly, I just wanted something to give people who often ask me what comics they should read, particularly if they are new to DC. Anyway, I will see you all in the next one.